Hello everybody. Hello. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Alex R. And I have been away for a little bit, and I've come back and noticed that my channel has a little over 200 subscribers, which is unexpected because I just didn't think anyone would really watch me, but I've said in another video that ASMR is really my hobby, and it's something I do to decompress. I really love it. You know, I've got my work and this is just very special, so thank you so much for watching. And yeah, thank you, I appreciate it. What I'd like to do, maybe next video, is do like a special 200 subscriber thing, which, yeah, I'm proud of it. I love it. I think I'll do like maybe a house tour, because you can kind of see I have a lot of stuff, and I live in like a studio apartment. So yeah, I think it would be fun to just take you around and show where I live. But for this video, I've got something I want to talk about, which is this book that I've read, Technological Slavery. And the cover's a little bit warped. I took this everywhere with me for a bit, and yeah, I'm going to talk about this book today. I've also got a little can of coffee. This is a first for me. I don't normally drink this, but I was at the grocery store and saw it and decided to try it, and it's really good. It's an oat milk latte. Definitely you can taste added sugar for sure, but I like it. So this book is of course about some heavier subject matter, but I hope that either you find this video interesting and you can listen to it, or just more relaxing and you can put it in the background of something that you're doing, like working or doing schoolwork. But I wanted to tell you about something that I noticed recently that's very aligned with this book. I live in a small community in Southern California, and in a tiny town, and there's really only two ways in and out. And one way is this road. It takes you through the hills and out by a different town. And every day, driving out, I would see, in this huge dirt lot, I would see a woman sitting in a chair under an umbrella next to a fruit stand, and she would sell fruit every day, and it's been really hot here. And she was in a great location because in her little spot, cars driving out and into the town could see her, as well as cars kind of passing on this road that takes you into the next city. So great location. But just a few days ago, I was driving and I noticed that she was not there anymore. She was gone, and in her place, instead of her, there are these two giant signs. They're huge. They're taller than any person, so you can just walk under them if you wanted to. And they say in big red letters, they say, no trespassing private property. And then there's something about violators will be, persecuted, or this and that, fined. And then it says sheriff, and it has the sheriff's phone number. That way, if you see a trespasser, aka a woman selling fruit, you could call the sheriff and have her arrested, essentially. So that's new, and it's been days. She's not there, and those signs are there. So now it's just an empty dirt lot. It's huge, empty, sitting there under the California sun, I guess just enjoyed by the owner of the land and God. That's it. So it's kind of the crackdown of the law, I suppose. But the reason I bring that up is this book, as I'll go on to talk about, is mostly about the fact that we, according to Ted Kaczynski, the author, we are not really free. Free in the important sense. We are instead free to obey the structure of the technological industrial system that we've made, including bureaucracy and red tape. So you're free to sell fruit, but you have to have a permit. You have to have a license to sell the stuff, and you will need to pay taxes on that. And then also you will need to sell that on either land that you are paying for, so you own it, or you're renting it, etc., etc. You have to obey the laws about where you can sell things. There's also a bunch more that goes into this conception of freedom, but certainly the story of the woman selling fruit is an example of a way in which there are times when we intuitively know that something is off, and we need these laws and regulations to keep a large society ordered. But then you just get a time like that really shows that some of these laws are a little bit anti-human, like the fact that that patch of dirt is private property, so the woman can't sell her fruit, and then we can't buy it. And that's not a choice made by us, the community. That's the choice made by this kind of anonymous hand of the law somewhere. So I'm going to talk more about what he has to say about freedom. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about him, Ted Kaczynski, because you have to give this thing context. And what I'm going to do is, I think, to talk about this book, I would like to draw out the ways in which I view the ideas relating to each other. So you'll see a bit of a top-down view of some paper. But then I'll just talk about him, and you'll see me on camera. So let's talk about this book. This is Technological Slavery by Theodore John Kaczynski. All right. Thank you for bearing with me. I don't have a tall tripod, so I'm going to try to draw on this sketchbook, and hopefully the angle is okay so that you can see, but I'm going to start with maybe a central idea. I'll start up here, and maybe I'll write the title so that you know what we're talking about. Technological slavery. You can kind of tell a lot by the title. So, technological slavery. The biggest idea, I'm going to draw a rectangle, because what he's saying is that essentially we are free only if that we work within the system that's been built for us. So this is kind of like our fence that we can live in, right? So here's us. Yay, we're free only in this situation. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, he says that what we really need lies out here. It's not in the system that we've made. And he argues that what we need is to go through the power process. The power process. So, to Ted Kaczynski, that means that we have to have goals, and that we have to make an autonomous effort to attain the goal. So there's a goal that we want, and then an autonomous effort to attain the goal. So, essentially, he mentions that for matters of life and death, we really don't have any control anymore. A lot of this power process is gone. So you think about a goal, right? So out here in the power process world, I'll draw like a mountain and maybe some trees. This is kind of the natural world where we're animals still. And maybe you'll have like a little hut, and maybe there's animals that you hunt for food, right? So in this power process of trying to eat, maybe you have to kill the animal, you have to prepare the animal, cook it and eat it. You're trying to feed your family, right? This is the power process. You're kind of on your own here. Unfortunately, this is not how we've structured the world anymore. Now we get our food from technological, industrial processes. So you don't need to do this. This is irrelevant. Instead, you just go to the grocery store and get your food. And he says doing that over and over and over, always having the power process denied to us, creates a kind of lethargy, a kind of domestication, almost like this is our zoo that we've put ourselves in. So what that leads to, we'll say this is kind of the first idea, right? That human beings are in the zoo. What we really need is this. Our second thing, we need this, but we don't have that. So instead, point number 3 is that what happens because we cannot go through the power process is that we make surrogate activities. So surrogate activities is a way where we can feel like we're going through the power process. This might be like a job. You have your job here. So it's a surrogate activity. It kind of simulates this, but it doesn't ever really fully hit well. So we could say maybe a hobby like working on motorcycles, something like that. Distractions, TV, distractions, but also medications and illness, because we become depressed. And so we turn to all these things to make us feel better, because this is an unnatural life and it depresses us and makes us ill. Another thing he says is that part of what we get when we leave the power process behind, we'll draw an equality sign, is we get a fixation on these kind of second-hand weak values, such as equality. We're getting into territory of like Black Lives Matter, gay rights, the idea of left and right in politics. He thinks all of that stuff is just kind of chatter, and it's really just because we're trying to enact this original human power process. So all this is he views as really secondhand and just not relevant, because the real problem is the cage we've put ourselves in. that that's the real problem. And so we shouldn't be focusing on these secondhand things. We should be focusing on how to get out of the zoo that we've made. Now, all of this is essentially saying, we'll go this way, is, I guess, point number 5, basically, is that the conditions that we live in are radically different than how we have evolved. Here's this big skyscraper, and here's the little hut. So the conditions that we live in, this kind of matrix of, skyscrapers and offices and all that, is just so different than what our brains and bodies need to feel good and to not fall into depression, right? And I think there's ideas here that a lot of people can relate to. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people can relate to. And in this territory, there's really like a ton of evidence for aspects of our lives leading to the types of illness that he's talking about. And this is kind of where you get it's hard to refute. Like, we know that technology, like digital technology, hijacks our reward pathways. And here, I'll draw a little brain. This is me drawing a brain. And so we know that there are so many areas in which we're overstimulated sensorially, but we're understimulated with meaningful activity and autonomy. Many of us feel trapped on this kind of rat wheel of life, and we can't get off of it. We're always having to be employed over somebody else, under somebody else. We're always kind of feeling stuck. And we run up against the walls of our cage so often in our modern society. So this is kind of the first big chunk of this book, is he spends explaining the way that these ideas relate to each other. And then the second part of the book is his response to it. And he essentially says that what we need is a revolution. He explicitly says that you cannot reform. You cannot reform. Now, the reason for revolution, he says it's very much like a light switch. This is a light switch, by the way. And it's either in the on position or the off position. There is no in between. Reform is not going to work because he says that ultimately people are pretty comfortable. This is my person. And this person has to weigh, do you want a home and shelter and food from the grocery store, like pizza, like all that's really nice? Or do you want to go back to nature and embrace natural disaster, higher infant mortality rates, and ultimately a very high risk of death? Most people are not going to choose this. Even though we deal with mental illness, there is a lot of frustration. We're going to pick this avenue because it's comfortable, and that's kind of how we're built psychologically, is we're going to pick, the pizza in the house with electricity. And we're not going to leave behind the technological industrial system. He believes that reform will not work. He's very absolute about this, that reform does not work, because he fundamentally believes that this is the root of our problems, and that by reforming one little piece of it, saying, let's reform, the 9 to 5, let's reform prison, let's reform this and that and this and that. He says you can't reform all these little pieces and have it change the whole. that fundamentally the powers that be are going to ensure that we have some type of large system that really controls our lives. So he thinks that it's just unrealistic and doesn't work to reform, but that revolution is possible and has happened, as with the Russian Revolution. So this is kind of the place he situates us. It's a bit hard to deny certain things about what he's saying about technological society, and also what he says about people not wanting revolution is true. I mean, I believe that's true. This is a hard pill to swallow. You know what I mean? So I think overall he's seeing things from a bird's eye view. He makes some ideas that are really hard to refute, but there's also a lot of room here for response. There's a lot of room here to participate in the conversation. He mentions something actually in the book which I believe to be true. He said it's always possible that in the event of a collapse, a societal collapse, whether that's climate change or some other disaster or a revolution, in that event, there's always the possibility that we would just end up rebuilding a very similar cage that restricts our freedom. He says, however, that going through a complete collapse is worth it, because what ultimately happens, what's the consequences if you keep going? The consequences are that human beings will be further and further reduced to domesticated animals with no dignity left, and in fact, traditional values like courage or just even the way that we function, like evolutionarily, will change. He believes that human beings could be bioengineered to be docile and very happy. He says already the technological system, what's sneaky about it is that it makes us comfortable with situations we should not be comfortable with a life that we should not be comfortable with, and then it offers us solutions to distract us from our discomfort. I think we can all find examples where that's true. So he already says that system is good at doing that, just as a baseline. And he's very concerned with the possibility that human beings can be bioengineered to be more docile and come to love this way of life that just is a very capitalist, consumerist way of life. So that's a little bit about the book and some of the arguments that he lays out in the book. I want to talk a little bit about him and the context of how this was written, and then respond to it a little bit. So, Ted Kaczynski, of course, is the Unabomber, and you really have to talk about him, I think, to understand the book, or you have to learn about him to really fully get where the book is coming from. And here's why. The fact is that he was a murderer. He was a criminal. He killed people. And why that's important is because this is ultimately a manifesto. And it's a manifesto of a murderer. Now, there are others that exist in the world. There's a few that I've read, and what I've noticed is that there tends to be, in these types of manifestos that killers leave behind, there is a lot of self-mythologizing. There's a lot of kind of grand, idealistic, and narcissistic language about themselves and their growing up and the ways in which the world has made them bitter and angry, or why it's the world's fault that they did what they did. However, this is not that. Ted Kaczynski, it's actually the almost complete opposite direction, where he does not self-mythologize at all. Instead, he has this role of being highly logical. He was very smart. He had a high IQ. And his writing, you can tell he's very logical and not very emotional. Although, I think there are times when you can feel that resentment or anger leaks out in the writing, and you can feel resentment, those more negative emotions. But I bring that up because even though he's not self-mythologizing like maybe a mass shooter would in a manifesto, this is still an extreme document. It still lives in an extremity, not necessarily an emotional extreme, but actually a logical extreme, such that I would say that your average reader, somebody like you or me, upon reading this, it will hit like some of the points you really can't dispute, and it'll hit consistent and very clear, but there's something very off about it. That offness comes from that extreme, that most people are not narcissistically self-mythologizing and having this complex about them versus the world, and most people are not so logical as to kind of reason your way to apocalypse and societal collapse. So, or at least not be able to commit, even if you've logically said, that's the answer, is the collapse of society. You're not going to commit. He committed. So he mailed bombs to people, and he murdered them. These were people who he associated with the society that we live in. There's plenty of videos about his timeline and how he did it and who he impacted. So I'm not going to get into that here, but it's important to bring up to make my point that he really committed to this. And actually, it reminds me of one of the common doomsday scenarios with artificial intelligence or robotics. If you've ever seen iRobot, that movie plays out that doomsday scenario in which artificial intelligence is tasked with solving, I guess, the problem of humanity, or it's responsible for deciding the best way to keep us safe human beings. And because it's cold and logical and not emotional, in this scenario, it just comes up with a way to essentially imprison us, and says maybe the best thing for human beings is that they shouldn't be allowed to be human and be self-destructive. And so by saving them, we either eliminate them, they need to be eliminated, or they need to be reduced to servitude and nothingness. This writing actually kind of reminds me of that. Because it ignores a lot of nuance and a lot of gray area that I think we inhabit as human animals. And there are things that I believe, I'm arguing this, that are fundamental to human life he does not seem to either experience or acknowledge as part of the baseline, just being a human being. One of those is just wonder, or even curiosity as human beings. A lot of what he calls surrogate activities for the power process, to me, might actually come from somewhere different, So yes, maybe people are frustrated by the system that they live in, and they turn to a job to feel a sense of control, or they turn to a hobby, or they turn to a passion. But I think taking passion, all the areas that, music, art, the sciences, the place where passion is on display, and saying, prescribing that and saying, actually, that's because we aren't hunter-gatherers anymore, or that's because we're frustrated by the society we live in, I think completely omits the kind of more mystical human factors of wonder and curiosity. So I think his writing and his actions that he took in life, that type of radicalism, that type of extremism, comes from a hyperlogical place that when I read it, I view as just as maybe unusual as the other pole, the self-mythologizing narcissism of other manifestos. So this text, well, ultimately I really relate to it, and he makes some excellent points. I also view this as not or unusual, at least, very outside of what the average person could fully commit to. And I don't know if he would argue with that. He does make a lot of points about how the type of personality needed to bring down the collapse of the technological society is very rare, and most people are not going to do it. And he calls more of the cognition that I have kind of weaker or softer or just not very useful. So it's a very interesting read. He's very self-aware, and he really has got his arguments down, but I personally think there's a lot of room to talk about his assumptions about primitive peoples and primitive society, and to me is the biggest maybe issue or unaddressed area, which is the human tendency at curiosity and wonder, that I think is part of the power process that he's not addressing. I think there's more to that process than having a goal and making an autonomous effort to attain the goal. I think also in that power process has to be things like play, and just straight up curiosity, because it's very human to see a snail and want to maybe poke at it a little bit, or just need to make narratives about natural phenomena. I think part, maybe underneath our kind of capitalist social media ad revenue hellscape, there's rescuable values that I think went into making that hellscape, but can also get us out of it. And he really has no room for that in this book. So, I recommend it. Technological Slavery. They make he's passed away now, right? He passed away recently in prison, and actually on the book, I think they make this point right here, that he does not receive any remuneration. Is that a word? Remuneration? He doesn't receive money for this book. He can't. But I don't know about your ethics of buying a book like this written by a person like that, but I really, really enjoyed reading it, and it got me thinking a lot. And definitely, when I drive past that dirt lot now outside of my town, and I think about the fruit lady and I wonder where she is, I think back to this book, because it does, his concept of freedom, I think there's something about it that hits very true, where sometimes I look around and I think, that's just not right. It just doesn't feel human, why? But I think that that frustration I don't take as far as he does, but I think this is a really valuable read, and actually his logical thoroughness is a little bit refreshing. He doesn't really make a lot of excuses for anything, and I liked that about the book. So, okay, I think that's it for this video on technological slavery. Of course, these opinions are my own. I've seen videos that really you can focus on radically different things. I've left so much out because this book is full of ideas. I didn't even scratch the surface or mention his many chapters on liberals, or how conservatives are fools, but mostly liberals are fools. Didn't even touch that, because that's not what interested me, but there could be a whole nother video on the way he describes the left, which is also very interesting. So, anyway, this was just my take on this book and what I got from it and what I thought about it. I hope that you found this video at least interesting. And thank you for 200 subscribers. You'll see me here in the next video, and I'll take you through my house a little bit. Yeah, thank you for watching. I hope to see you again, and have a great day or a great night.